and say that the thing that inspired them to run for office was the Women's March. That seeing that collective power of women was so inspiring to them. I wonder if you would see any correlation in your interviews between the number of pussy hats that a person made and their optimism level.
I don't know.
And I don't say that lightly. I say that because since the start of the Pussyhat Project, I have remained busy, politically busy at pretty much every moment. So, I knit 100 and some pussy hats, and then as soon as I was done with them, I was knitting welcome blankets. And then, I was starting this podcast, and I was making postcards for voters, and I'm sort of constantly doing something. And I'm in Indivisible, the social media. And so I'm sort of constantly working at trying to make things better in whatever small way I can. And I have remained fairly optimistic through all of it. There have been certain things that have been sort of crushing and depressing, but my overall feeling has been one of optimism. My husband has been the opposite. He, has sort of reluctantly come along to some marches with me, and, he's written a few postcards under duress, but, he's largely not been that involved. It's been too hard for him to become involved because he still hasn't processed it. He's not over it. And so because he's not doing these things, he's much less optimistic than I am. Well, I don't know if there's a because. There's correlation. I don't know for sure if there's causation or which way it is. But my feeling is that because I am working at it, I feel this collective power that we have. And so I'm on Twitter with all these other people writing postcards to voters and saying, all right, look, we can make a difference. We can do this. And he is not. And so I think he still thinks of politics as something that the parties do. And I now think of politics as something that people do.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes a very big difference in the way that we view the future and the possibility of the future.
Wow. That's so well said. It gives me some ideas for, again, how to think about pulling out information that's embedded in those interviews about people's involvement and people's connection with others around these issues. And there's lots of things that can correlate with that whole optimism question. And that's one of them that I might look at for sure.
Geographic area that they're living in might make a difference too.
That's true. Yeah, and I have thought about that. I've thought about trying to correlate that with how red or how blue their county is. Because I have zip codes, so I can kind of look at some of these things on maps, and that's a cool way to look at it.
Sophie, are you optimistic about the future?
I am, actually. I wasn't last year, I think, but I have become more optimistic just having read a bunch of history this year and thought about it. And I don't know, I feel like the period that we're living in is a period of sort of backlash, and I think it's all sort of temporary. I mean, I could be completely wrong, and that doesn't mean that I'm not going to fight with every bit of my being, as I've been doing since the Women's March. But I do have the optimism that my son will live in a better world than I do.
I was always so relieved when people said something like that. It always made me kind of sad when people said they weren't optimistic, because my reaction when people would say, yes, I'm optimistic, is, oh, I'm so glad. That was how I felt to hear that. It just, there was a sense of relief that people were not in a place where they were suffering under not having hope, I guess.
My grandparents lived through World War II and the Depression. My grandfather fought in World War II, and my grandmother has always told me all these horrible stories about World War II. She always used to say, I don't understand all these other people. She's in her 90s now. I don't understand all these other old people who want to be young again. I'd rather die than live in the 40s again. It was so terrible. And so all her stories about World War II and the Depression have really, weirdly enough, helped me to think about, when she was in that era, to imagine how much better things would have been unthinkable.
Yeah, that's really meaningful to me. My husband's motto, which I think is like in his Twitter bio now is change. Changes aren't permanent, but change is. And it's his way of trying to combat this feeling that everything we lose, it's like permanently lost. It's like, well, I guess we'll never have X again. This kind of sense of this permanent, degeneration of everything. And he's trying to fight that by thinking, well, every change that's happening now, that itself will change in the future. So that's helpful to me.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good note to end on. So, Donna, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I think
thanks.
We definitely want to have you back on again sometime, because clearly the three of us have a lot to talk about with religion and feminism and material culture. So
definitely,
I love it. Yeah, let's do it again, and we'll branch out from the Pussyhats and talk about some religion stuff. It'd be great.
Yeah. All right. So thank you. And listeners, please make sure you review us on iTunes. We're trying to beat our friends at the End Times Pep Talk podcast. Mm-hmm. Right now, they have more iTunes reviews than we do, and that's just untenable, guys. So make sure you go on and review us on iTunes. All right. Thanks, Donna. Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly and Donna.
Our theme music is called Sweeter Vermouth and was composed by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. It is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Our logo was created by Matthew Weflin, expressly for Two Broads Talking Politics, and is copyright 2017. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or at twobroadstalk on Twitter. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and TuneIn. Please let us know if you have any trouble finding us.